Well, the Senate has voted to advance a resolution that would limit President Trump's ability to take any additional military action in Venezuela without congressional approval. The measure passed 52 to 47, advancing the measure. Now, 5 Republicans actually joined Democrats in advancing this measure, following a surprise U.S. raid that captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Now, lawmakers say the vote sends a clear message about Congress's role in decisions of war, though the resolution still faces major obstacles ahead. Joining me now is Washington Stand reporter Casey Harper. Casey, understanding that this is just the first in many steps in the legislative process, and the president would have to sign it, so the reality is it's unlikely to become law. But what would the measure do?
Yeah, that's right, Tony. In many ways, this is sending a message, especially with some Republican support. But to your question, this resolution specifically, it requires congressional approval before the president can take any future U.S. military action in Venezuela after his pretty, unilateral decisions to remove Nicolas Maduro. And then we have this, it's unclear how much the oil, 30 to 50 million barrels of oil, was seized or given over with a lot of pressure. And now the president's saying that they're going to, or Secretary Hegseth and Rubio saying that they're going to, use this oil to direct a Venezuelan transition. And the president saying that this could take years to come. With all of that going on, this new resolution, if it, is sending the message that Congress wants to be involved. It passed with bipartisan support, but it does face a likely veto from President Trump, as you said. Here's what Senator Chuck Schumer had to say about it.
How can the American people watch this and not just groan and grimace and ache and fear when we try to do this kind of nation, when America has tried to do this kind of nation building, this kinds of regime replacement in the past? It's led to the American people paying the price in treasure and in blood.
So that's Senator Schumer echoing the sentiment of many Democrats from his House floor speech today, Tony.
Casey, this may not come as a surprise to you, but Senator Schumer does not move me in any form or fashion toward or against the piece of legislation. But, Casey, with 5 Republicans joining in this, I would think that there is a political message being sent.
There is a political message being sent, but of course to say, hey, we want to be included as this goes on, especially if, as President Trump is saying, this is going to take years. I mean, the Republican senators who broke with this, I looked into their statements, and for the most part, there was a distinction made where they didn't say that what President Trump did to capture Maduro was necessarily wrong, but they said, hey, going forward, we want Congress to be involved, especially if this is going to drag on or involve any kind of military involvement. So they weren't necessarily condemning what the president did, though many Democrats did. And you mentioned those 5 senators. We had Senator Rand Paul, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Todd Young, and Josh Hawley, who voted to send this message to Trump, which comes after this backlash over the raid to Nicolas Maduro's capture. But President Trump had many supporters. Here's what Senator Jim Risch had to say.
There isn't anybody that has any information that the president is using armed forces against Venezuela. He did for about 47 minutes this last weekend, but he is not in the process of doing this. And the resolution says that he should stop it. He's not doing it. Now, if the resolution were drawn to say, President, you can't do this anymore, that would actually have some effect, or attempt to have some effect. It would be unconstitutional, unenforceable. But to tell him to not do something or to stop doing something he's not doing is nonsense. The effect of this is to slap the President of the United States in the face.
So Senator Risch's comment about enforceability is an interesting comment here. But overall, he's echoing the sentiment of Republicans who support it. They say this was very brief, and this is not even close to a declaration of war, Tony.
Well, we'll look at that a little bit more later. I want to switch gears to domestic issues. Minnesota and federal officials are at odds over a U.S. immigration agent fatally shooting a Minneapolis woman as the FBI assumed sole control of the investigation. Now, the shooting has triggered protests and conflicting accounts of what actually happened have been surfacing. So, Casey, what are the facts as we know them right now?
sure we have multiple videos going viral online. We have President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance supporting the ICE officer along with ICE itself and DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, whereas many Democrats, including local Minnesota Democrats, Tim Walz, the mayor, Jacob Fry, saying this is, reprehensible. And we've seen massive protests break out all over the country in some of the predictable cities. Now, these protests aren't new, by the way, Tony. I mean, we've seen these anti-ICE protests going on for months and months, but they've been renewed, reinvigorated. And as I said, federal officials are in lockstep. They're saying that even though there's going to be an investigation, that the agent acted in self-defense. As I said, those state leaders, they say that the video tells a different story. And these protests, I think this is just the beginning, because we're going to have more hearings, more investigation into this, and these protests are only mounting. As you can see here, the video footage is increasingly violent, and more violent than the other protests that I've been following last year, Tony.
All right, thanks, Casey. We're going to take a little bit more of a look at that a little bit later. All right, the Republican-controlled House is preparing to vote on legislation addressing the expired Obamacare subsidies as insurance costs rise for millions of Americans. Now, Republicans say action is needed. I think there's agreement there, but warn that the program is costly and vulnerable to waste. So, Casey, where do things stand right now with this?
Yeah, Tony. So this is in the aftermath, as you know, of the government shutdown, where Democrats shut down the government over these expiring Obamacare subsidies, because it turns out the Affordable Care Act was not as affordable as many hoped, and the premiums are skyrocketing. And so this vote, though, it's important to note, this came from a discharge petition, which means that any lawmaker, Republican or Democrat, can introduce legislation and circumvent their leadership of their party. So we saw support for this from representatives like Brian Fitzpatrick, John Katko, and others. But like the bill before it, this needs both chambers and presidential approval, though I think President Trump might be more inclined to have a conversation about health care like this one. So Senate Republicans, they're continuing to speak sort of a different tune. They're opposing a full extension, but they want something shorter, more targeted, and a plan for lower income Americans. And GOP lawmakers say the ACA needs to rein in the oversight, have oversight to rein in the fraud, waste, and the exploding healthcare costs that we're seeing all around the country, Tony.
All right, Casey, we're going to look at that a little bit more with Dr. Andy Harris a little bit later. Thanks so much for joining us, Casey. Talk to you later.
Thanks,